Discipline is a form of prayer. For 20 years, that has been my creed. My body is not a temple. It is an instrument, a finely tuned Stradivarius of muscle and bone that I, the musician, command. Every morning begins in the bruised gray light before dawn, not with a gentle waking, but with a declaration of intent. I do not stretch. I lengthen. I align. I command each fiber to obey. The ritual of wrapping my toes, the bite of the rosin on my point shoes, the first sharp intake of breath in the cool, mirror-walled studio, these are the rites that keep the world in its proper, ordered shape. Control is not a desire. It is a necessity. In the perfect, clean lines of a plie, in the clockwork precision of 32 fouettes, there is no room for chaos. There is only the will and its execution. There is only safety. I was on the cusp of everything. At 24, I was a principal dancer with the company. The name on the posters the body critics described with words like unflinching and preternatural. They mistook talent for ease. They didn't see the 5 a.m. sessions, the meticulous cataloging of every calorie, the constant low-grade hum of pain that was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. They didn't understand that every performance was not an act of grace, but an act of war against gravity, against fatigue, against the natural, lazy inclinations of the flesh. A war I was winning. The first betrayal was small, a whisper, not a shout. It was a Tuesday morning, during a solo rehearsal for Giselle. I was moving through a simple adagio sequence when a strange stiffness bloomed in my neck, on the left side, just below the ear. It wasn't the familiar ache of a strained muscle. It was a deeper, more intrinsic resistance, as if a single wire in the intricate machinery of my body had rusted solid. I tried to complete a fluid head roll, a movement I had performed 100,000 times, and was met with a stubborn, grinding halt. A hot needle of frustrated pain shot down into my shoulder. I stopped, my reflection in the vast mirror watching me with cold, impartial eyes. An anomaly. I cataloged it as such, attributing it to sleeping in a draft or a knot of tension, and I forced the movement. The pain sharpened, but the line was achieved. The will, as always, had triumphed over the material. I put it out of my mind. It was a fluke, a meaningless, random variable in an otherwise perfect equation. The instrument simply needed a firmer hand. The whispers grew louder. The fluke in my neck became a persistent, deep-seated ache. Then my left shoulder began to echo the sentiment, a new and terrifying rigidity setting into the joint that no amount of stretching could loosen. My body, my perfect and obedient instrument, was playing its own discordant melody. The war was no longer against external forces like gravity. It was an internal civil war, and I was losing territory with each passing day. My control, the very bedrock of my existence, was fracturing. My performances, once praised for their precision, were now described as brittle. I knew what they meant. I could feel it. The effortless grace was gone, replaced by a desperate, straining imitation of my former self. The doctor's office was a sterile, white world that mocked the clean lines I so cherished. His words were cold, precise, and utterly monstrous. Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, he said, the name clumsy, ugly thing, a genetic anomaly, a betrayal written into my code from birth. He explained the process in detached, clinical terms. My body's healing mechanism was broken. In response to injury or inflammation, my muscle, tendons, and ligaments would be replaced by bone. My skeleton was staging a coup, building a cage from the inside out. There was no care, no treatment. His final piece of advice was the cruelest irony of all. "Avoid injury," he'd said, looking at me with a pity I refused to accept. "Avoid strenuous activity. Be careful. Be careful." For a dancer, that is a death sentence. I walked out of that clinic into a world that had lost its color. The diagnosis was not just a medical report, it was a monster, a grotesque sculptor who had been living inside me, dormant my entire life. And my discipline, my grueling, punishing perfectionism, every fall, every strain, every microscopic tear in the muscle had been an invitation. I had been feeding it, nurturing it, helping it grow. My answer was denial, sharp and absolute. I would prove him wrong. I would prove science wrong. This was just another opponent, another force to be overcome by sheer will. I returned to the studio with a desperate fervor, pushing myself harder than ever before. I would force the rust from my joints. I would bend my flesh back to submission. Each movement was now a battle. I danced through a haze of agony, the grinding in my shoulder a constant reminder of the sculptor's work. One evening, exhausted and sweat-soaked, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror behind me. It was a shadow, tall and gaunt where no shadow should be. When I turned, it was gone. But I knew what it was. It was him, the artist. And he was watching me, waiting for me to falter, waiting for the next cut. My world shrank to the four walls of the studio. The phone calls from the company's artistic director went from concerned to frustrated to funereal. I was taken off the performance roster. My name disappeared from the posters. I ignored it all. The world outside the studio, with its pitying looks and well-meaning advice, was irrelevant. This floor, these bars, this mirror, this was the only reality that mattered. It was my sanctuary and my battlefield. The sculptor grew bolder. He was no longer a fleeting shadow. I would see him standing in the dusty corners of the room, a tall, gaunt figure made of bone dust and silence. He carried a phantom chisel and hammer, and his eyes were hollow sockets that held a terrifyingly calm, appraising gaze. I knew he wasn't real, not in the way the bar was real. He was a hallucination, a personification of the disease born from the doctor's sterile report and my own deepest fears. But his presence was a chilling reality. I could feel his gaze on me as I danced, a cold pressure on my skin, and the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of his imagined chisel became the soundtrack to my decline. The disease was relentless. My left arm became almost useless, my shoulder joint a solid, unmoving knot of new bone. My fingers began to stiffen. I learned to dress myself with one hand. The subtle clicks in my jaw became a constant, grinding annoyance. The sculptor was working faster now. My body was becoming a gallery of his early works. My rage was a constant, cold fire. Rage at the disease, rage at the silent figure who haunted me, and rage at my own body for its catastrophic betrayal. The discipline that had been my prayer was now my curse. My life's work had armed my enemy. One afternoon, after an hour of trying and failing to raise my left arm above my head, I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. The sculptor stood by the mirror, watching me, his head tilted. The tapping was slow, patient. In that moment, I understood. He would win. He would chip away at me
piece by piece until I was nothing but a twisted, helpless monument to his art. Unless I chose the pose, unless I made the final masterpiece mine. The thought was a bolt of lightning in the darkness of my despair. My escape wasn't the door. It was this floor, this art, this final defiant assertion of will over matter. I would perform one last dance, a perfect final arabesque. I would create a line so beautiful and so pure that it would burn his memory from these walls. I would not be his creation. I would be my own.
Time stopped. My final gasping breath hung in the cold air between us. The grotesque sculptor, this creature born from a doctor's sterile report and my own deepest fears, took a slow, deliberate step towards me. Its phantom chisel and hammer were held loosely at its sides, its work apparently done for the moment. The hollows of its eyes fixed on me, and in that gaze I understood its purpose completely. This wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of creation. My disease was its medium, my body was its clay, and my terror was simply the friction of the artist's hands shaping the material. My dancer's instinct, the one honed by 2 decades of discipline, screamed a single command: run. But my legs were lead. The 32 turns I'd attempted in my rage had left them shaking. The ankle I'd landed on throbbed with a pain that felt like crushed glass. I scrambled backward, my hand slipping in the dust on the floor, my graceless, panicked retreat a hideous parody of the control I once cherished. Every inch I gained, it matched with a slow, unhurried glide. It wasn't chasing me, it was accompanying me. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap started again, soft and patient, the sound of a craftsman contemplating his next cut. I pushed myself up, using one of the bars for support. My knuckles were right. "You are not real," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You are not real." The thing tilted its head, a gesture of almost gentle curiosity. It raised its skeletal hand, not the one with the tools, but the other one, and pointed a long, bone-white finger at my neck. A white-hot needle of pain shot through me, exactly where the new stiffness had begun that morning. It was a vicious, intimate agony, as if its touch had ignited the very cells that were betraying me. I cried out, a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the cavernous silence of the studio. This was its power. It couldn't break my bones, not directly. It could only encourage them. Its touch was a catalyst, a whisper to the rogue process already happening inside me, telling it where to build next. But then the fear was burned away by a sudden white-hot blast of pure rage. If I was going to be a statue, I would not be his masterpiece. I would be mine. With a defiant scream, I pushed off the bar. I would finish my dance. I would perform a perfect arabesque, a final beautiful line, and hold it until my muscles gave out. It was all I had left. I planted my supporting leg, ignoring the grinding protest from my ankle. I raised my other leg behind me, my arms extending, my back arching into the familiar, beautiful curve. The pain was a roaring fire, but for one glorious, impossible second, I felt it. The line, the perfect, unbroken line from my fingertips to my toes. I was a dancer again. The sculptor watched, its head cocked. It seemed to approve. It raised its phantom chisel. It didn't touch me. It didn't have to. As I held the pose, a new sensation began in my supporting leg. Not pain, but a strange effervescent warmth that spread up from my ankle. It was a fizzing, prickly feeling like my entire calf was falling asleep. Then the warmth began to cool, and with the cooling came a terrifying density.
It felt like wet plaster setting, a slow, inexorable pull from flesh into something inert. Panic shattered my focus. I tried to lower my leg, but it wouldn't move. My ankle was locked. The hardening was moving up my shin, a creeping tide of immobility. My will was no longer connected to my body. The signals were sent, but the wires were cut. The sculptor took another step closer, its gaze fixed on my leg, an artist inspecting his work. The phantom tapping grew faster, more excited. I screamed and threw my weight forward, trying to force my body to collapse. And that's when I heard the crack. It was not loud. A dry, brittle snap like a dead branch breaking underfoot. But in the silence of the studio, it was a gunshot. The sound came from my supporting leg, from the tibia that was no half bone, half stone. The unnatural fusions couldn't bear this sudden torsion. It had shattered. My world tilted sideways. I fell, crashing to the floorboards like a broken piece of furniture. The impact was a deep, resonant shock that shuddered through my entire frame. The pain was blinding, but it was secondary to the new, catastrophic event unfolding inside me. The fracture, a major injury. It was not a request to my body, it was a command. Heal, make bone. My body, in its broken wisdom, obeyed with a terrifying, explosive fervor. The hardening was no longer a creep, it was a flash flood. I felt it erupt from the fracture, a wave of chemical heat racing through my veins. It surged up my torso into my arms, my joints whizzed and then locked, one by one, hip, knee, elbow. The subtle clicking in my jaw was replaced by a grinding sensation, and then silence as my mouth fused shut and my final scream trapped in my throat. I watched as a helpless passenger, as my fingers curled and hardened into a clawed grip on the dusty floor. My back, arched in a defying arabesque, was now freezing into a grotesque broken curve. The last thing I felt was the season of the muscles in my neck, my head locking into place, my gaze fixed forever on a sliver of my own piece in the clouded, grimy mirror.
The sculptor stood over me. The tapping stopped. Its masterpiece was complete. It looked down at my frozen, broken form, and I sensed not malice, but a quiet, profound sense of artistic satisfaction. Its form began to waver, to lose its sharp edges, the bone dust and shadows that composed it dissolving back into the silence of the room. Its purpose was fulfilled. It faded away, leaving me alone in the dust and the dark. I don't know how long it has been. Time is measured differently now, not in the taking of a clock or the turning of a page, but in the slow crawl of sunlight across the floorboards my eyes can no longer track. I can still see, though my field of vision is an unchanging portrait of dusty wood, the base of a burrow, and a distorted sliver of my own frozen face in the mirror. I see the Destimotes dance in the afternoon light. I hear the maddeningly rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water from the leaky ceiling. Sometimes on windy nights, I hear the old building groan around me, and I can feel the vibrations through the points where my body is fused to the floor. These are my companions. My mind is still here. Oh yes, it is perfectly preserved. It is screaming. It is a constant, silent, unending shriek in the locked-in darkness of my own skull. My greatest fear was never death. It was this: to be aware, to be a conscious mind trapped in a cage of my own making, a silent spectator to my own decay. I was a perfectionist. I craved control, believing that discipline was safety. My entire life was a battle to force my body to obey, to create a perfect, flawless form through sheer will. And in the end, my own ambition was the chisel, and my body was the marble.
I have achieved a kind of perfection, haven't I? I am a sculpture, a permanent, unchanging, silent work of art, frozen in a pose of broken grace. The artist is gone, but the art remains. And the audience, the terrified, screaming audience of one, is trapped inside it. Forever.
Thank you so much for watching or listening. Like and subscribe for more nightmares. Your support keeps the darkness from consuming this channel, so we can face the next terrifying story together. Don't be left in the dark.